The public imagination is fixated on the wrong vector. You are conditioned to watch the skies for missiles, for hypersonic launches. This is a deliberate misdirection. The kinetic cost of a peer-to-peer conventional conflict is prohibitive. Adversaries like Iran, which openly signal readiness for all-out war, understand this equation. Their strategic calculus is not based on parity, but on asymmetric leverage. The primary threat is not a launch you can see. The true vector is silence. The weapon is the severance of data. CSIS reports detail the deployment of adversary submarine drones with the specific capability to target the 1.3 million kilometers of undersea fiber optic cables that constitute the central nervous system of the global economy. Simultaneously, RUSI analysts warn of a launch-on-warning posture for satellite blinding technologies. This is not about destroying infrastructure. It is about inducing a systemic data blackout. This protocol is engineered to create a specific outcome: the blind Leviathan. The Western financial system, which a Bank of America survey confirms has collapsed its hedging and entered a state of hyperbull complacency, is the target. It is a hyper-leveraged organism built entirely on the instantaneous flow of data. By cutting the optic nerves, the cables and satellites, an adversary doesn't need to fire a single shot. They turn the Leviathan blind. A system with no price discovery, no settlement capability, instantly transforms from a global asset into a systemic liability. It begins to thrash, triggering a solvency crisis of mathematical certainty. The primary motive is not ideology, it is a solvency crisis. According to analysis from institutions like RUSI, prolonged conventional warfare is an economic death sentence for Russia. The conflict registers not as a strategic gain, but as a catastrophic domestic liability, draining national reserves and eroding internal political stability. When the kinetic cost of fielding a tank exceeds the state's ability to finance it, the state itself becomes insolvent. This is a mathematical certainty. This financial weakness forces a pivot. A state facing a solvency event cannot compete symmetrically. It must abandon the expensive industrial-era model of warfare and adopt a new protocol: low-cost, high-impact asymmetric attacks. The objective shifts from capturing ground to collapsing systems. Reports confirm that critical infrastructure, such as in Australia, is unprepared for this new vector of drone-enabled cyber attacks. The math is irrefutable. Why spend millions on a tank when a $1,000 drone can achieve a strategic financial effect orders of magnitude greater? The true accelerant is not adversary strength, but Western complacency. A Bank of America survey confirms global investors have entered a hyperbull phase, collapsing hedging mechanisms that once served as systemic firewalls. This transforms the Western financial system from a fortress into a hyper-leveraged liability. This complacency creates a powerful mathematical incentive for an adversary. The target is no longer military, it's market liquidity. Triggering a cascade becomes the primary strategic aim. The endgame is a controlled demolition. By engineering economic insulation via protocols like the BRICS digital currency linkage, adversary blocks are building an arc. They are preparing to absorb the blowback from a crisis they intend to trigger. For a state like Iran, facing internal collapse and threatening all-out war, or Russia, facing a solvency crisis, triggering a liquidity crisis in the West, is not an act of madness. It is a calculated zero-sum bid for survival, a form of financial launch-on warning. The strategic calculus has shifted from a question of military superiority to one of pure economic arbitrage. The kinetic cost to neutralize a $5 million main battle tank is now as low as $500. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost-benefit ratio, a figure corroborated by analysts at institutes like RUSI. This is not warfare in the traditional sense. It is a solvency equation. This radical cost asymmetry is the engine behind what strategists term the democratization of violence. The capacity for systemic disruption once the exclusive domain of state superpowers has been distributed. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal, strategic force is no longer a multi-billion-dollar military budget. It is a credit card and an internet connection. This validates threats from actors like Iran, whose warnings of all-out war are not declarations of conventional parity, but of asymmetric capability. The primary vector of attack, however, is not physical infrastructure itself, but the market's psychological reaction to its disruption. As a recent Bank of America survey confirms, global investors have entered a state of hyperbull complacency, collapsing their hedging protocols. The financial system has been stripped of its shock absorbers. This creates a mathematical incentive for an adversary to deploy low-cost cyber and drone attacks, as confirmed by warnings about Australia's critical infrastructure. The goal is not destruction. It is to trigger a market solvency crisis, a launch-on warning protocol for economic decapitation that achieves strategic aims far beyond their kinetic reach. The regional instability vectors are being misdiagnosed. They are not the threat. They are the laboratory. CSIS reports confirm these gray zones are controlled environments to test asymmetric attacks with plausible deniability. The objective is to calibrate impact. Deploying the drone-enabled cyber attacks, which early warnings confirm Australia's infrastructure is not ready for, allows an adversary to map a nation's digital and political pain threshold at a low kinetic cost. This staging is a direct result of pre-engineered economic insulation. The protocol to link BRICS digital currencies isn't about trade. It's a solvency firewall to absorb financial blowback. This is what grants actors like Iran the strategic latitude to threaten all-out war. The economic deterrence has been factored out of the equation. They are running simulations on live targets, collecting the data required for a systemic, non-kinetic strike on the primary economic system. The launch-on warning doctrine is not a relic of the Cold War. It is the active protocol governing systemic response under duress. The principle is a mathematical absolute. If early warning systems detect an incoming existential threat, you must launch a retaliatory strike before your own capacity is neutralized. The alternative is to absorb a first strike and possess zero assets for a counter move. It is a zero-sum calculation with no margin for error. The vector of attack has now shifted. The modern battle space is not soil. It is the digital control plane. Analysts at CSIS confirm that adversaries no longer need to penetrate physical defenses. They target the sensory organs of the state, the radar, the satellite uplinks, the financial clearinghouses. A report on Australian infrastructure readiness confirms the liability. Critical systems are not prepared for a sophisticated, drone-enabled cyber attack. This is not a regional vulnerability, it is a systemic blueprint. This creates the fog of digital war. When a cyber attack blinds a nation's early warning radar, the commander is faced with a solvency crisis of information. Is this a limited hack, or is it the prelude to a full-spectrum kinetic assault? The protocol of launch on warning offers only one answer. Out of fear of total neutralization, the commander is forced to assume the worst-case scenario and launch a counterstrike based on no signal at all. This transforms a defensive doctrine into a liability. The adversary's objective is not to win a conventional war, but to trigger a fatal, systemic overreaction. As adversary states like Iran openly threaten all-out war, the kinetic cost for them to achieve this objective plummets. They do not need to launch a missile. They only need to create the digital ghost of one, forcing our own protocols to liquidate our strategic position. The documented collapse of hedging has transformed Western capital markets into a systemic liability. This hyperbole complacency, reported by Reuters, is not strength. It is a pre-existing condition that creates a mathematical incentive for a low-cost, high-impact solvency test. While adversary blocks engineer financial insulation via BRICS digital currency protocols, source number 1, and signal a high tolerance for strategic chaos, source number 2, our infrastructure remains the primary kinetic target. Assessments confirm that critical nodes are not ready for a drone-enabled cyber attack, source number 3. A vulnerability CSIS identifies as the new asymmetric battleground. The calibration forecast for the next 12 months is therefore a coordinated attribution impossible event. Expect a 48 to 72-hour blackout of a Tier 1 logistics and data hub, the Port of Singapore, or a primary fiber optic landing station. The objective is not destruction. It is a data-gathering exercise to measure the financial cascade in a brittle, unhedged system, a live-fire test of our economic breaking point.